I faked losing everything I had ever built. I showed up at my oldest son's door in a coat that smelled like 3 days of sleeping on concrete, and he handed me an envelope without making eye contact. My middle son offered me his parking garage for the night and told me not to tell anyone. But my daughter, the one I had quietly worried about for 20 years, the one who married a man who fixes trucks for a living and raises chickens in a yard that needs mowing. She put me in her only bed, covered me with a quilt her mother made before she died, and sat on the kitchen floor with her husband that night, talking about which one of their dreams they were willing to let go of in order to save me. The next morning, when my attorney walked through their front door carrying a folder that changed everything, the looks on my sons' faces told me everything I had spent 65 years refusing to learn. Before we go any further, I want you to take a moment and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read more of them than you'd think, and your presence here means something to me. Just a quick note before I begin. Some of the details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of telling it honestly. The emotions are real. The lesson is real. Everything else is close enough to the truth that it keeps me up at night. The house in Scottsdale had 11 rooms, and no one in any of them but me. I had bought it the year I turned 55, the year I retired from cardiothoracic surgery after 31 years of opening chests and holding hearts in my hands. I had thought the space would fill itself somehow, the way spaces always had when my wife was alive. She had a gift for making rooms feel inhabited just by moving through them, but she had been gone for 6 years by then, and I had learned the hard way that a house does not grieve the way you grieve. It just sits there. 11 rooms, heated pool. I swam in twice a year, a garage with 3 cars I rotated on a quarterly schedule so the tires wouldn't flatten, a kitchen that a chef came to twice a week to prepare meals. I ate alone at a table built for 8. My net worth, as of my last conversation with my financial advisor, sat at just under $4 million. Not the obscene wealth of a tech billionaire, but the quiet, solid wealth of a man who had spent decades working 80-hour weeks and never spent what he earned. My 3 children had grown up in good schools in a good neighborhood, with every material comfort I had been too busy to provide emotionally. I knew that. I had always known that. Some debts compound in ways money cannot settle. The first call came on a Tuesday evening in February. My oldest son, my firstborn, the one I put through Wharton and then watched build himself into one of the more successful fund managers in his firm, called me while I was eating dinner alone at that long table. His name appeared on my phone, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with cardiology. "Hey, Dad." "Good timing," he said, which I understood to mean that he had planned this call in advance. We exchanged the brief pleasantries that had become the architecture of our relationship. 3 sentences about the weather, 2 about his work, none about anything real. Then he got to it. "There's an opportunity I can't pass on. I need $400,000 wired by end of week." Not 400,000. Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "I've been thinking about you." Not even, "Is this a good time?" I asked him what the opportunity was. He explained it in a way that told me he understood the mechanics of the deal, but not the human being he was calling to fund it. When he finished, I asked him if he wanted to come out to Scottsdale sometime, maybe for the weekend. We could look it over together. "I can't swing that right now. Schedule is brutal. Can you move on the wire?" I told him I would think about it. My middle son called 40 minutes later. He is a real estate developer in Miami. Sharp, driven, perpetually in the middle of something that cannot wait. He had my ambition, but not my patience, and he had built a life that reflected both of those facts. He needed $250,000 for a land parcel in Dade County that was going to appreciate dramatically, he said, and he needed to move before someone else did. "Son," I said, "it's been almost 4 months since we talked." I know. Things have been insane." He paused. "Can I count on you for this?" "I'll think about it," I said, same as I'd said to the first one. The third call came just before 9 o'clock. It was my daughter. She is the youngest of the three, 34 years old, living in a town of about 30,000 people in eastern Tennessee with her husband, a man who runs a small trucking and repair business out of a shop behind their house. She did not go to a prestigious university. She studied nursing at a state school, worked for several years, and then largely stepped back when the demands of their life made 2 full-time careers difficult to manage. I had worried about her for years. I had, and I am ashamed to say this plainly, felt something adjacent to disappointment when I understood what her life was going to look like, not because she was unhappy, but because it was not what I had imagined for her. "Dad," her voice was warm, the way rooms used to be when her mother was in them. "I was just thinking about you. Are you eating?" I laughed. I actually laughed. "I'm eating," I said. We talked for nearly 30 minutes about nothing, about everything. She asked about my sleep, my swimming, whether I had called the doctor about my knee. She told me about a family of deer that had started appearing at the edge of their property in the mornings. She said her husband had started making his grandmother's chili recipe on Sundays, and that it had become something she looked forward to all week. She never asked me for a single thing. When I hung up, I sat in the silence of my 11-room house for a long time. I am a surgeon by training. I spent 3 decades making decisions under conditions that did not allow for hesitation or sentiment. And so, when I made the decision I made that night, I made it with the clarity I had learned in operating rooms, methodical, deliberate, and fully aware that what I was about to do could not be undone. I called my attorney. His name is William, and he has known me for 22 years. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for longer than I expected. "Raymond," he said carefully, "you understand what you're asking?" "I do," I said. He tried to argue me out of it. He brought up liability, my age, the physical realities of spending nights without shelter in February. I told him I had once repaired a ruptured aorta in under 6 minutes with a resident who kept dropping instruments. I would be fine. We set it up over the following week, a security detail that would shadow me at a distance, a burner phone, a plan. Then I went to my closet, and I began to take myself apart. I want to tell you something about that process, because I think it matters. Standing in front of a mirror in clothing I had bought secondhand from a Goodwill in Tempe, a canvas jacket with a broken zipper, work pants with a stain on the knee that had not come out. I understood something I had been too comfortable to understand before. Identity is fragile. The things we wear, the cars we drive, the addresses we give people when they ask where we live, all of it is scaffolding. When you remove the scaffolding, what stands? I didn't wash my hair for 3 days before I left. I roughed my hands in a way that would have horrified the colleagues who had trusted those hands with their most critical patients. I stopped shaving. By the time I walked out of my house in Scottsdale and handed my keys to the security team, I did not look like a man who had spent 31 years saving lives in some of the best hospitals in the country. I looked like nobody, and nobody, I was about to discover, is invisible in ways that a somebody never fully understands. The first night was a Greyhound station in Phoenix. I had bag with a change of clothes and the burner phone. I had $40 in small bills. I sat on a bench between a teenager asleep across his backpack and an older woman with a grocery cart full of belongings, organized with a precision that suggested she had been doing this a long time. Her name, I eventually learned, was Dolores. She had worked as a hotel housekeeper for 17 years until her back gave out. She had a daughter somewhere in Oregon who had stopped answering her phone. She had been living between the station and a nearby shelter for about 8 months. She offered me half of a granola bar she pulled from her coat pocket, unwrapping it the way you unwrap something precious. I took it. It was the kind of granola bar that costs 99 cents at a gas station, oats and artificial honey, and not much else. I have eaten at restaurants where a single dish cost more than some people earn in a week, and I want to tell you honestly that nothing I have ever eaten at any of those restaurants tasted the way that granola bar tasted. Sitting in a bus station at 11:30 at night next to a woman who had nothing and gave me half of it anyway. "Dolores," I said, "why did you do that? You don't know me." She looked at me with the patient eyes of someone who has had to simplify things down to their essence. "You looked hungry," she said. "That's enough of reason." I sat with her for a long time. I did not sleep much. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, she told me something I have not forgotten. She said that the hardest part about losing everything was not the cold or the hunger. It was the way people looked through you, like you had become a problem the world had already decided not to solve. I know something about that, I thought. I had driven past people like her 10,000 times without seeing them. On the second day, I made my way to New York. My oldest son lives in a townhouse in the West Village that I helped him purchase 9 years ago, $4.5 million. A number of dollars. A number that felt different now that I was arriving at his door in a broken zipper jacket with 3 days of not washing behind me. I rang the bell. A long pause. His voice through the intercom was already cautious. "Who is it?" "It's your father," I said. Another pause, longer. The door opened, and he stood there in a cashmere sweater and the kind of ease that wealth provides when you have had it long enough to stop noticing it. He looked at me. I watched his face move through shock, then confusion, then something harder. Something I recognized as the beginning of a social calculation. "What happened to you?" he said. I told him. I kept it simple and true enough to be believable. A malpractice case I had underestimated. A judgment that had wiped out my liquid assets. My account frozen. My financial advisor unreachable. I needed a place to sleep. A few days. Just somewhere safe while I sorted things out. He let me into the entryway. Not the living room. The entryway. He stood with his arms crossed. "Dad, this is..." He stopped. "We have people coming tonight. Business dinner. I can't have..." I waited. He looked at me the way I had seen men look at problems they needed to minimize. Not cruel, exactly. Could not kind. Efficient in a way that excluded everything inconvenient. "I can put you up at a hotel," he said finally. "A decent one. I'll cover it." I told him I needed more than a hotel. I told him I needed family. He was already reaching for his wallet. He gave me $300. He handed it to me the way you hand someone a receipt. A transaction concluded. An obligation discharged. He told me to get some rest, and that we would talk in a few days when things settled down. Then he closed the door. I stood on his stoop in the West Village, holding $300, listening to the sound of his lock engaging. Around me, the city moved. Taxis and delivery bikes, and people in coats that cost more than my jacket was supposed to make me look worth. None of them saw me. I was part of the furniture of misfortune that cities generate and then learn to ignore. $300 from the son I had funded through an Ivy League MBA. $300 and a hotel suggestion and a locked door. I walked for a long time that night. I flew to Miami on the third morning. My middle son lives in a penthouse on Brickell with a view of the bay that costs him $19,000 a month in rent. I had never said anything about that rent. I had learned long ago that saying things to him was less effective than saying nothing and waiting. His building had a doorman who looked at me the way I had come to expect. I told him I was there to see my son. He called up, and there was a pause on the intercom that told me my son was deciding. He came down himself. He did not invite me up. We stood in the lobby, a lobby with a waterfall feature and ambient lighting calibrated to make everyone feel successful. And he looked at me with the careful expression of a man calculating exposure. "Dad, what is this?" he said. Not a question, a classification. I told him the same story. Malpractice judgment. Assets frozen. I needed a few days. He glanced at the doorman. He shifted his weight. "I've got a storage unit," he said, "in Wynwood. It's climate-controlled. You could sleep there tonight and I can." A storage unit? I looked at my middle son. This man I had coached through his first real estate deal. This man I had bailed out twice in his 20s when his ambition got ahead of his judgment. And I understood that he was offering me a storage unit because it solved his problem without requiring him to do anything difficult. He gave me $250 and the address of the storage unit. He said he would have someone bring a cot. He said it would only be for a night or two. He said the door code was 4417. He walked back to his elevator without looking at me again. I stood in that gleaming lobby for a moment, and then I walked outside into the Miami heat. And I thought about a storage unit, and a cot, and a door code. And I thought about a woman named Dolores in a Phoenix bus station who had given me half of a granola bar because I looked hungry. That was enough of a reason. I had one stop left. I took the bus 18 hours northeast through Georgia and into Tennessee, watching the landscape change from flat to rolling to something older and quieter and more honest. Eastern Tennessee in February is gray and cold and still, the kind of stillness that feels less like emptiness and more like patience. My daughter and her husband live on 4 acres outside a small town. There is a gravel driveway that takes about 30 seconds to walk up. There is a garden in the front that was mostly dormant, a few kale plants surviving the winter. There is a wooden porch with 2 rocking chairs that had weathered to silver. There is a barn-style garage behind the house where her husband runs his business, a diesel repair and hauling operation with 2 trucks and a crew of 3. Nothing about any of it says wealth. Everything about it says home. I knocked on the door at just after 6 in the evening. I heard footsteps. Then the door opened, and my daughter stood there in a flannel shirt and jeans with flour on her wrists. And she looked at me for about 2 seconds before her face broke open. "Dad, oh my God, what? Come inside," she said. And she had me by the arm before I finished processing the sentence. She did not pause. She did not calculate. She did not glance over her shoulder at her husband's reaction or consider the optics of a homeless elderly man on her porch. She simply reached for me and pulled me inside. The house was warm. There was something in the oven. A dog I hadn't met before came and sniffed my shoes with professional thoroughness, and then returned to his spot near the fireplace, as if he had determined I was acceptable. Her husband came in from the back of the house, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He is a large man, built for work with kind eyes, and a handshake that tells you something about how he moves through the world. He took one look at me and one look at his wife, and he said simply, "I'll get the kettle on." That was it. No hesitation, no performance of welcome, just the kettle. My daughter sat me down at their kitchen table, which was the kind of table where things actually happen. Homework and bill paying and Sunday dinners and hard conversations. She brought a basin of warm water for my hands and a towel, and she asked me what happened in the quiet, direct way of someone who has spent years doing triage. I told them the same story: malpractice, assets frozen, nowhere to go. Her husband set a mug of tea in front of me and pulled out a chair and sat down across from me without a word of complaint or hesitation. And the three of us sat at that table while I told a lie that was also the most honest thing I had done in years. "You're staying here," my daughter said, not a question. I started to protest. I didn't want to impose. I could find somewhere. She put her hand over mine. "You're staying here," she said again. And that was the end of the conversation. They gave me their bedroom. I told them I would take the couch. My daughter looked at me with an expression I recognized from her childhood, a look that meant the decision had already been made, and what I said next was largely ceremonial. "You're in our room," she said. "We're on the couch. That's what we're doing." Her husband nodded like this was the obvious answer to an obvious question. I showered for the first time in 4 days. I stood under the hot water until the cold went out of my bones, and some layer of accumulated shame dissolved along with the grime. When I came out, there were clean clothes on the bed, her husband's flannel shirt, a pair of sweatpants, thick socks, practical, warm. Offered without ceremony. She fed me dinner at that kitchen table. A pot roast that had been in the oven all day with potatoes and carrots and the kind of gravy that takes time. We talked while we ate. Careful conversation. The way people talk when they know something is fragile but are choosing not to name it yet. After dinner, her husband cleaned up the kitchen without being asked. My daughter sat with me on the couch, and we watched an old movie neither of us paid much attention to. Around 9 o'clock, she walked me to their bedroom door and told me to sleep as long as I needed. I lay in their bed under a quilt her mother had made from old dress fabric in the last year before she got sick. And I stared at the ceiling. I thought about my oldest son's entryway. I thought about my middle son's offer of a storage unit. And then I thought about 2 rocking chairs weathered to silver and a table where things actually happen. And I did not understand, not yet, not fully, the depth of what I had walked into. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of their voices. Their bedroom is at the end of the hall, and the house is small, in the way that honest houses are small. No space wasted, everything close. They thought I was asleep. They were in the kitchen speaking in the low voices of 2 people who have learned to have hard conversations without waking each other fully. I did not mean to listen, but sound carries in a small house, and their voices reached me the way things reach you when the rest of the world has gone quiet. My daughter's voice first. "We need to talk about the truck." Her husband was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know. The blue truck," she continued. "It's the one that's fully paid off. We could get about $22,000 for it. Maybe $25,000 if we find the right buyer. That's the Roanoke contract truck," he said. "If we sell it, we can't fulfill." "I know." She paused. "But he has nothing right now. He has nowhere to go. And $25,000 could get him somewhere stable, get him a lawyer who can fight the judgment, get him time." His voice was careful, not resistant. Careful. "That truck is how we make rent," he said. "You know that." "I know," she said again. Another silence. He spoke slowly. "If we sell it, I can ask Davis to take over the Roanoke runs temporarily. It would cost us, but it's doable for maybe 4-5 months. Enough time to figure something out." My daughter didn't answer immediately. I heard the refrigerator open, the quiet sound of her husband moving around the kitchen, the way people move when they're thinking with their bodies as well as their minds. "I need to say something," he said. She waited. "He's not just your dad. He's part of this family. He helped us when we were starting out. He co-signed the loan for the shop. And even if he hadn't, even if he was just some old man who knocked on our door, this is still the right thing." His voice was steady, not sentimental, just true. My daughter made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cry, or both. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I married you. We'll sell the truck," he said. "Tomorrow, I'll call Davis and we'll sell the truck." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. In 31 years of surgery, I had stood at the edge of the most extreme human moments, the moment a heart stops and the moment it starts again. The moment a family learns that everything has changed, the moment a body comes back from somewhere it should not have been able to return from. I had learned to hold myself steady through all of it, with the clinical distance that the work required. I want to tell you that I held myself steady in that moment in their bedroom. I did not. I wept into the quilt her mother had made. The way you weep when something true touches a part of you that has been closed for a very long time. They were going to sell the truck that paid their rent. They were going to call in a favor and absorb the loss, and do it without telling me, so I would not feel like a burden. They were going to do it because a man who had not been present enough, or honest enough, or brave enough, had knocked on their door with nothing, and they had opened it without asking whether he deserved it. In the morning, my daughter was already up when I came to the kitchen. She had coffee made, and she set a cup in front of me with the same practical warmth she had shown the night before. Her husband was out back in the shop, and she and I sat at the kitchen table in the early light, and I looked at my daughter, and I understood that she had grown into someone I had not been present enough to fully witness becoming. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I was not ready for. "I think you already know that we're going to be okay," she said. I looked at her. "I think I've known since yesterday," she said. "The way you looked at the house when you came up the drive. The way you listened to everything we said." She folded her hands around her mug. "I don't know the details, but I think this might be something you needed to do." She said it without anger, without accusation. She said it the way she had said everything, with a directness that came from a place of love rather than grievance. I couldn't speak. "Whatever it is," she continued, "we would have done the same thing. I just want you to know that. Whatever you were looking for last night, the answer is still the same." I thought about what she had heard me overhear, and then I understood something about my daughter that should have been obvious for years. She had not given me her bed and planned to sell her truck because I was her father. She had done it because that was who she was, and who she was had nothing to do with what she expected in return. "That's the answer I was looking for," I said finally. She nodded, and neither of us said anything else for a while because some things do not need saying. I made the call to William that morning, sitting on the porch in one of those rocking chairs. "Bring the documents," I told him. "Bring them here. And call my sons. Tell them I need them here today. Tell them it's urgent." William drove through the night from Scottsdale. My oldest son flew in from New York on the first flight he could find, which told me that $300 and a locked door had not entirely quieted his conscience. My middle son drove up from Atlanta, where he had been for a meeting, in a rental car with his jaw already set the way it sets when he is preparing to manage a situation. They arrived within an hour of each other, mid-morning, pulling up the gravel driveway in vehicles that were wrong for the landscape in a way that said everything about the distance between their lives and their sisters. I was sitting on the porch when they came up the drive. My oldest son stopped at the base of the porch steps. He looked at me, the clean clothes, the mug of coffee, the absence of the desperation he had last seen on his doorstep in New York, and I watched his face move through the particular sequence of a man beginning to understand that he has been tested. My middle son stood beside him, and his expression traveled the same route a few seconds behind. My daughter stood in the doorway. "Come inside," I said. William had sat up at the kitchen table. My daughter had made more coffee. Her husband stood near the back wall with his arms at his sides, not hostile, not performative, just present the way he was always present, solid and uncomplicated and real. I looked at my 3 children gathered in that small kitchen, and I thought about the 11-room house in Scottsdale, and the long table built for 8, and I thought about the way spaces fill themselves with the right people, or remain empty, regardless of how much you spend furnishing them. "I want to tell you what I found over the last 4 days," I said. I told them everything: the calls, the decision, the bus station, and Dolores, and the granola bar, the entryway in New York, and the $300, the storage unit in Miami, and the door code 4417, and then this house, this kitchen, this family that had given me everything they had, without asking me a single question about whether I deserved it. My oldest son's face had gone through several colors by the time I finished. "You staged this," he said. "Yes," I said. "Dad, that is—" He stopped. His jaw worked. My middle son was looking at the floor. "I'm not telling you this to punish you," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you this because I did something wrong a long time ago. I raised you to believe that success meant accumulation. I taught you by example and by absence that a person's worth could be calculated. And I looked at both of them. I never taught you what your sister somehow learned anyway, that the people in front of you are more important than the thing you're protecting." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a truck passed on the county road. William opened the folder. "My estate, as of this morning, has a value of approximately $3.8 million. There is also the house in Scottsdale, which is paid in full, and an investment account that has not been touched in 6 years. Everything is real. Nothing was lost." I looked at my sons. "I am restructuring my estate today," I said. "Your sister and her husband will receive the house in Scottsdale, which they can sell or use as they choose. They will receive $200,000 placed in a trust for any children they may have, and a direct gift of $150,000 to replace the income they were prepared to lose on my behalf." My daughter's hand went to her mouth. "To you both," I continued, looking at my sons. "I am leaving $200,000 each. That is not a punishment. It is what you gave me in return for what I gave you. Not the money, the presence, the attention, the choice. You gave me transactions. I am matching the currency." My oldest son started to speak. I held up a hand. "There are conditions attached to your portions," I said. "A year of family therapy, 100 hours of service at a shelter of your choosing, not a donation, actual hours. And you come here, to this house, for Thanksgiving this year, not to a restaurant, here at this table." William slid 2 envelopes across the table. My middle son picked his up and held it without opening it. He looked at his sister for a long time. "Why didn't you tell us?" he said finally. "That you knew." She looked at him steadily. "Because it didn't matter," she said, "whether it was a test or not. He needed help. That's enough of a reason." Then she said it the same way Dolores had said it in the bus station, with the patience of someone who has simplified things down to their essence. And I understood that my daughter had spent her whole life learning the same lesson that woman had learned out of necessity, and that the lesson was perhaps the most important one there was. Before we continue, and I know some of you have been with me a long time today, I want you to do something. If you're still here, just comment the word, still here, because what comes next took time. It took more than a moment or a revelation. It took 3 years and a lot of hard Tuesdays, and I want to tell you about it. 3 years. 3 years of Tuesday phone calls that started formal and became something I had never fully had with my sons before. Actual conversations. My oldest son spent his first 50 hours of service at a shelter in Lower Manhattan and came home, according to his wife, quieter than she had seen him in years. He called me after his 3rd week there and said he had met a man who used to be an engineer. He said it like the information had landed somewhere it wasn't expected to go. My middle son took longer. He is built like me, resistant to the thing that would help him, suspicious of softness. But he came to Thanksgiving that first year, and he sat at this kitchen table, and he watched how his sister and her husband moved around each other, how they built a meal together without anyone directing it, how the warmth in the room had nothing to do with the heating system, and something in him shifted. I saw it happen. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens in the places a person does not announce. By the 2nd year, he was calling his sister on his own, not for anything, just to talk. I sold the house in Scottsdale. I bought a smaller place about 12 minutes from my daughter's house on a road where the trees grow close enough to the road that the light comes through in pieces in the summer. I have a garden now, which is a new development in my 68th year of life. I am not good at it. My son-in-law comes over on Saturday mornings and tells me what I'm doing wrong, and I listen to him the way I should have listened to people for the first 30 years of my adult life. My granddaughter was born 14 months after all of this happened. Her name is June. She has her mother's eyes and her father's way of looking at you, like she has already decided she likes you as a starting position rather than a conclusion. She is 2 years old, and she calls me by a name she invented herself that is not quite any word in any language, and I answer to it every time without hesitation. I want to tell you what I know now that I did not know before. I spent 31 years with my hands inside people's chests. I repaired things that most people never see and can't imagine the interior machinery of a human life, the valves and vessels and rhythms that hold everything together. I was good at it. I am proud of it. I do not regret the work, but I spent those same 31 years treating the people who loved me the way I treated a difficult procedure. Something to be managed efficiently. Something not to let distract you from the thing you were trying to accomplish. I was the difficult procedure. I just didn't know it. What my daughter understood, and what her husband understood, and what Dolores in that bus station understood with her half of a granola bar, is something that cannot be taught in a school or accumulated in an account. It is simply this. When someone is in front of you and they need help, the help is the point. Not what comes after, not what it costs you, not whether you will be recognized for it. The help is the point. I built a career saving lives one at a time in rooms most people never see. My daughter saves them in the way that doesn't get counted or documented or written up in any journal. She saves them by answering the door and pulling people inside and making the kettle go on. She saves them by giving up the truck that pays the rent and not telling anyone she did it. That is a kind of medicine I did not learn in medical school. I am learning it now. At 68 years old in a small house 12 minutes from a kitchen table where things actually happen. I am learning what it means to be present, to answer the door, to ask simply, "Are you okay?" and mean it. If this story has meant something to you today, I want to ask 3 things. Tell me in the comments about a time someone showed up for you when they had every reason not to. Those stories matter. They need to be told. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to change what you're building, not your portfolio, but your presence. And if you have children or parents or siblings you have been treating as a transaction, please pick up the phone. Not to ask for something, just to ask how they are. My name is not important. What I was is not important. What I am trying to become, that is everything. And if you have stayed with me until the end of this, I want you to know, so are you.